We are the first YouTubers to investigate the world's most haunted museum.
You guys be the first to ever sit in the double rocking chair.
I don't let anybody do this. You don't want to touch it.
No, I don't even want to go near it.
Most people visit museums to feel safe, but behind locked doors sit artifacts so dangerous they are treated like explosives.
This is the worst thing in here. It's that doll. I'm not gonna stare at it though.
Some can poison you through the air. Some have ruined lives. Some are blamed for deaths that no one can explain.
He was provoking the demon. The demon left David, possessed Arnie Johnson. Arnie Johnson then committed a murder.
Staff refuse to touch them. Scientists handle them in fear. These objects are sealed in vaults because opening the wrong case could trigger panic, accidents, or something far worse.
Zach first opened up this museum, he would not even allow anybody in the basement.
Everything that he has in this museum is frightening as hell.
These are the deadliest artifacts ever hidden from the public. The hand of glory that should not exist. The first thing most visitors notice at the Whitby Museum is the mummified human hand sealed inside a glass case. It looks dried, shriveled, and impossibly intact. Most people step back when they see it because there is something very wrong about this object. The museum calls it the Hand of Glory. The name comes from a real criminal ritual that took place centuries ago. Thieves would cut off the hand of an executed criminal and dry it until it became stiff and preserved. They believed the hand still held the power of the dead person. During a break-in, they would insert small wicks into the fingertips and set them on fire. The burning fingertips acted like candles. The thieves believed that anyone inside the house would fall into an unnatural sleep the moment the hand was lit. They also believed the hand would keep the victims completely frozen, unable to wake up or move until the thieves were gone. It sounds like nonsense until you learn that police records from the 17th and 18th centuries mention real crimes where victims said they could not move from their beds. These events helped build the legend around this object. The Whitby hand was discovered in 1935 inside a cottage wall in Yorkshire. Someone hid it on purpose. Scientists examined it and confirmed that it is completely human. What shocked them was the preservation. It has no embalming chemicals. It has no salts or drying agents. It has none of the ingredients that normally prevent decay. This hand should have rotted into dust centuries ago, yet it looks like it was dried only a few years earlier. Researchers suggested smoke drying in a chimney or contact with alkaline soil. Neither explanation fits the condition of the tissue or the trimmed shape of the fingers. Forensic imaging revealed straight cut marks. The fingers were shortened evenly. This proves that someone prepared the hand specifically for ritual use. It was made by someone who believed in the power of the object and wanted it ready for practice. Staff members hate being assigned to this exhibit. Several motion sensors in the room have been triggered at night even when the building was locked and empty. One former curator refused to handle the case after a dream that involved a silent figure standing over him. Many visitors report numbness in their hands after staring at the artifact. No medical explanation has been confirmed. The museum keeps the hand sealed because it affects people. It causes panic, discomfort, and sometimes physical reactions. It is displayed with caution because whatever happened to create it was not normal. The Mutter Museum. The Mutter Museum in Philadelphia is a medical history museum that belongs to the College of Physicians of Philadelphia. The Mutter Museum looks harmless when you first walk in. It has old wooden cabinets, soft lighting, and long rows of shelves that look like they belong in a quiet library. The moment you step closer, you realize the jars on those shelves are not filled with harmless samples. These jars are called wet specimen jars because they hold organs preserved in liquid. Many of them contain preserved human organs that were collected more than 100 years ago. Doctors in the 19th and early 20th centuries used strong chemicals to keep these specimens from rotting. They relied on arsenic, which is a toxic metal that poisons the body in tiny amounts, mercury, which is a heavy liquid metal that damages the nervous system, and formaldehyde, which is a harsh chemical that hardens tissue. These substances do not become safe with time. They stay inside the jars and slowly break down into even more dangerous forms. Some jars still contain biological material from people who died of infectious diseases. Scientists who studied several samples in 2013 found genetic material from smallpox, tuberculosis, and syphilis. The pathogens are no longer alive, but the DNA itself can still cause problems in a laboratory setting. This means the material must be handled with special safety rules. These rules are normally used for controlled research environments rather than museum displays. The chemicals used to preserve the organs are also turning into new hazards. Old formaldehyde slowly changes into formic acid. Formic acid is corrosive and burns through organic material. Many of the jar lids have crystals forming around the seals. These crystals come from the acid. Some stoppers have cracked and allow small amounts of vapor to escape. Staff members use respirators and fume hoods when working in rooms that hold older containers. Victorian doctors also injected arsenic directly into corpses to preserve tissues. These preserved organs now contain arsenic inside the flesh itself. Arsenic travels through damp air and becomes a dust that can cling to surfaces. Students handling certain jars have reported tiny holes appearing in their gloves. Experts believe the acid and arsenic mixture is eating through the protective material. There are unsettling stories about items in storage. Staff members talk about a jar that expanded and burst without warning. A thick white fog drifted across several shelves before the ventilation system cleared the room. Many of these specimens can never be shown to the public again because of the risk of chemical exposure and contamination. The museum keeps these items locked away because even one mistake could put people in danger. The museum filled with poisonous animals. The Delbridge Museum of Natural History looked like a normal family attraction for decades. It sat beside the Great Plains Zoo in South Dakota and welcomed thousands of visitors every year. The museum displayed preserved animals that had been prepared by taxidermists many decades earlier. People walked past mounted bison, wolves, elk, and lions without realizing that every single animal in the building had become a toxic hazard. When officials finally tested the collection in 2023, the results shocked everyone. The taxidermy mounts were filled with arsenic and other poisons that had soaked through the hides and settled into the fur. Arsenic soap was once used by taxidermists as a standard tool to keep insects from destroying the animals. Arsenic soap is a mixture made from arsenic powder and fats, and it kills insects instantly. No one in the early 20th century understood how long the chemical would stay inside the animal. It never went away. It stayed in the bodies and dried into a fine dust that rose into the air with the slightest movement. Tests on several animals showed arsenic levels so high that anyone touching the fur would absorb the toxin through their skin. Some samples reached 1,600 milligrams per kilogram. This amount is enough to harm a person through repeated contact. The museum also discovered mercury nitrate in some mounts. Mercury nitrate was used to tan skins and make them flexible. Mercury nitrate damages the nervous system and becomes dangerous even in very small amounts. Internal city documents reported that children who visited the museum had low levels of arsenic dust on their clothing. The numbers were never publicly released. The findings raised serious concerns about how long visitors had been exposed without knowing it. Staff members who cleaned the displays said their cloths sometimes turned gray, even when they had not touched anything except the air around the mounts. Security guards noticed a strange metallic smell in certain rooms late at night. Experts now believe that this smell came from arsenic and mercury particles drifting in the air. One deer mount was so contaminated that brushing a hand across the fur created a cloud of white dust. That dust was almost pure arsenic. Restoring the collection would release more toxins, so the museum made the decision to seal the wing and close the building. The human specimen room that must never be opened. The National Museum of Health and Medicine in Silver Spring, Maryland, holds a collection so dangerous and disturbing that large sections of it are kept out of public view. Anyone who enters the restricted storage area sees rows of jars that contain real human organs. amputated limbs and tissue taken from Civil War soldiers. Many of the containers have not been opened since the 19th century. They still hold the original chemicals that doctors used during the war and in the years that followed. These chemicals were used to preserve organs and limbs for long-term study and to stop tissue from decaying before surgeons could examine it. These chemicals include chromic acid and mercuric chloride. Chromic acid is a strong corrosive substance that burns through skin and tissue. Mercuric chloride is a mercury compound that gives off poisonous vapor when the seal on a jar breaks. Both chemicals are banned today because of their extreme toxicity. Many of the human remains inside these jars were collected under battlefield conditions without consent. Doctors and military surgeons took these body parts for medical study because the Civil War created injuries that had never been seen on such a large scale. They wanted to understand how bullets shattered bone and how infections spread through wounds. They collected limbs to compare different types of amputations and to improve surgical techniques. They collected organs from soldiers who died of disease because outbreaks killed more troops than combat. Some physicians also took samples to send to military research hospitals so that the Army could build a medical reference collection. Some were taken from field hospitals where soldiers had no legal protection. Some were taken from civilians. There is no complete documentation of who many of these people were. Modern ethics laws prevent the museum from displaying them. Even if the chemicals were safe, the human rights issues surrounding these remains are too serious to ignore. The jars themselves are unstable. Some lids show rust from decades of chemical fumes. Others have a crust of crystallized salts around the edges. These crystals come from the slow breakdown of the preservation fluids. Staff have reported jars that bulged from pressure inside. The pressure comes from gases created by chemical reactions and tissue decomposition. One jar exploded in the 1980s and forced a full evacuation while specialists cleared the air. The possibility of another explosion is always present. These specimens cannot be displayed because the risk is too high. A broken jar can release toxic vapor that can cause severe burns to the skin and lungs and can damage the nervous system. A cracked lid can expose visitors to contaminated tissue that may contain harmful pathogens or chemical residues that can irritate the eyes, skin, and respiratory tract. The safest place for these jars is behind locked doors. The medieval book that people still fear to touch. The Codex Gigas sits inside a controlled room at the National Library of Sweden. Visitors can only view it through glass because the book is too dangerous and too unstable to expose directly to the public. The manuscript was produced in the Benedictine monastery of Podlasice in what is now the Czech Republic. The book survived fires, warfare, and the collapse of the monastery. Swedish soldiers seized it during the 30 Years' War and brought it to Sweden in 1648 as war plunder. It has remained in Sweden ever since and is now kept at the National Library of Sweden. It stands 3 feet tall and weighs more than 160 pounds. People call it the Devil's Bible because one full page shows a large illustration of the devil, drawn with unsettling detail. A legend claims the book was written in one night by a monk who promised to deliver a perfect manuscript or face death. When he realized he could not finish on time, he was said to have begged the devil for help. The book itself contains hazards that have nothing to do with legends. Scientific testing on the pigments shows the ink contains heavy metals. These metals include lead white, cinnabar, and arsenic-based greens. Lead and arsenic can cause skin lesions when touched. Cinnabar contains mercury and can cause long-term neurological damage if absorbed through the skin. The binding is just as disturbing. It required the hides of around 160 donkeys. This amount of material could only come from a wealthy patron or a large monastery that had access to massive resources. There is also a missing page. It was cut out of the book at some point in its history. No one knows who removed it or what it contained. The removal appears deliberate because the edges are clean and precise. Some scholars believe it held information considered dangerous or forbidden. Others believe it documented a ritual or confession that someone wanted to hide forever. Conservators who handle the manuscript report moments that make them uneasy. Some say the temperature in the room drops when the pages are turned. Others have noticed that the devil illustration appears slightly different under certain lighting. A priest who viewed the book in the 1980s said he felt physically ill when the page with the illustration was revealed. The Codex Gigas cannot be fully displayed because the pigments are toxic and the binding is fragile. A simple touch could spread lead or arsenic dust. The book also provokes strong reactions in visitors who believe the legend. Some people have fainted while viewing it. For safety and preservation, the manuscript remains locked behind glass where only specialists can approach it. The radioactive room the Smithsonian cannot open. Deep inside the Smithsonian storage facilities sits a collection so dangerous that only trained staff wearing protective gear are allowed near it. Most visitors never learn that the museum holds hundreds of artifacts painted with real radium. These objects look harmless. They include watches, aircraft gauges, and early medical tools. They came from a time when glowing paint was advertised as safe and modern. No one understood that it released constant ionizing radiation and that the danger never faded. Many of the workers who handled radium in the early 20th century later suffered bone cancer, severe anemia, and jaw necrosis. These are medical conditions caused by radioactive particles settling inside the body and destroying bone tissue from within. Some of the items in the Smithsonian's radium collection emit levels of radiation that exceed modern safety limits for public spaces. A few aviation dials have produced readings of 50 microsieverts per hour. This level is unsafe after only a few minutes of close contact. The risk comes from more than the surface radiation. Radium paint dries and breaks into flakes that fall from the objects. These flakes can be inhaled without noticing it. Once inside the body, the particles attach to bone and continue to emit radiation for years. Internal exposure is far more dangerous than standing near a radioactive object. It can slowly cause cancers that do not appear until long after the exposure. Several artifacts also arrived with radon gas trapped inside their containers. Radon is created when radium decays. It collects inside sealed spaces and must be vented by specialists. Workers have opened boxes and watched their detection equipment rise sharply as the gas escaped. Some masks with radium paint still glow faintly in dark rooms. Staff members describe the sight as unsettling because it proves the paint is still active even though decades have passed. These items cannot be displayed because they release harmful radiation at all times. The paint continues to break apart and creates dust that can enter the lungs. Radon gas can gather inside display cases and leak into public areas without warning. The Smithsonian stores these artifacts in lead-lined units because they are not safe for open viewing. Even trained handlers must limit their time near them. These objects are pieces of history, but they remain dangerous enough to harm a person today. The Museum of Cursed Objects that no one is allowed to enter. The Warren Occult Museum in Connecticut is closed to the public, but the collection inside still sits in the same rooms where Ed and Lorraine Warren once worked. These rooms hold objects that many people believe should never have been gathered in one place. The museum contains items taken from violent domestic cases, ritual sites, and homes where people claimed something supernatural had happened. Some were connected to assaults and deaths. Some were tools used in rituals that police described as disturbing. Others came from houses where families reported months of unexplained fear before the Warrens removed the objects. None of these items were meant to be placed on display like harmless antiques. The most infamous object is the Annabelle doll. It is a simple Raggedy Ann doll sealed inside a wooden case with a warning sign. The Warrens believed the doll was responsible for attacks on visitors. One man laughed at the doll and hit the case during a tour. He died in a motorcycle accident later that night. Priests blessed the room regularly because strange incidents kept happening. Staff have reported times when the case was found slightly open even though it had been locked during closing. The doll has been found with its head turned in a different direction than the day before. These events are recorded by the caretakers but have no confirmed explanation. Other objects in the museum include a piano said to play on its own. paintings taken from homes where people felt watched and coffins used in rituals. Many items came from scenes where police reported unusual behavior or sudden violence. When the museum was still open, visitors complained about dizziness and nausea near certain displays. Some felt pressure on their shoulders or said something tugged at their clothing. One investigator claimed he woke up with deep scratches on his back after spending time in the building. The museum did not close only because of zoning issues. Locals reported pets dying, sudden illness in nearby homes, and car accidents near the property. These claims cannot be proven, but they added to the pressure to shut the building down. The objects cannot be displayed to the public because the risks are too great. Even if nothing supernatural is involved, the psychological effect of these items is severe. Visitors who stood near them in the past often reported sudden anxiety, nausea, shaking hands, and a sense of being watched. Some experienced rapid heartbeat and felt an overwhelming urge to leave the room. These reactions happened even in people who did not believe in anything paranormal. Many of these reactions happened because visitors knew the violent history connected to the objects and felt fear and stress as soon as they stood near them. The museum remains closed because no one can guarantee what will happen if these objects are shown again. The skeleton that never wanted to be seen. The Hunterian Museum in London once displayed a skeleton that drew crowds for 2 centuries. It belonged to Charles Byrne, known during his life as the Irish Giant. Byrne stood around 7 feet 7 inches tall, a height caused by a pituitary tumor that made his body grow far beyond normal limits. His size turned him into a spectacle in 18th century London. People followed him on the street and paid to see him at shows. Byrne hated the attention and feared what would happen to him after death. He told friends that he never wanted to become a museum exhibit. He asked to be buried at sea so no surgeon could take his body. When Byrne died in 1783, the surgeon John Hunter ignored his wishes. Hunter paid people to steal the body before it could be taken for burial. The skeleton became part of Hunter's private medical collection and was displayed at the Hunterian Museum for more than 200 years. Byrne's bones were treated with early preservation chemicals, including wax coatings, alcohol solutions, and possibly arsenic compounds. These methods kept the skeleton intact, but they also made the remains hazardous to handle without proper protection. Modern genetic testing added another disturbing layer. In 2006, researchers studied preserved DNA from Byrne's teeth. They found a rare mutation linked to aggressive pituitary tumors, the same type that caused Byrne's extraordinary height. The mutation still exists in some families in Northern Ireland. This created a debate about Byrne's genetic privacy because his remains reveal medical information that living relatives may not want exposed. There are unconfirmed reports that unsettle museum staff. Some medical students claimed that the skeleton's jaw appeared to shift slightly when the floor vibrated. Workers in the storage area often describe the feeling of being watched even when alone. A rumor claims that the spirit of John Hunter guards the collection because he believed he had the right to own Byrne's body. The skeleton is no longer on public display. The decision to remove it was based on ethics rather than physical danger. But the hazards are still real. The preservation chemicals can cause irritation or poisoning if handled carelessly. There is also pressure from advocates who argue that Byrne's genetic information should not be exposed to the public. His remains are now stored away from visitors, and the museum acknowledges what Byrne wanted from the beginning. He never asked to be a spectacle. He wanted to be left alone. The unlucky mummy. The British Museum holds thousands of ancient objects, yet none have caused more unease than the artifact known as the unlucky mummy. It is not an actual mummy. It is a painted wooden coffin lid taken from the tomb of an Egyptian priestess who lived nearly 3,000 years ago. The artifact was removed from Egypt in the 19th century and passed through several private collectors before reaching the museum. Every person who owned it reported misfortune. 2 collectors lost their fortunes shortly after acquiring it. Another reportedly fell gravely ill within weeks of bringing it home. Stories surrounding the lid grew so intense that newspapers claimed it was responsible for everything from business failures to fatal accidents. The coffin lid was eventually purchased by the British Museum, where staff immediately began documenting a strange pattern. It became the artifact with the highest number of bad luck reports in the entire institution. Workers filed notes describing sudden illnesses among staff members who handled the display area. Security equipment near the artifact failed without warning. Motion detectors malfunctioned. Cameras froze. Some visitors refused to photograph it because they believed the lens would break or the image would appear distorted. The priestess depicted on the lid served in funerary rituals that involved symbols meant to protect the dead and punish those who disturbed their rest. The carvings on the lid refer to protection in the afterlife and consequences for offenders who violated sacred spaces. These inscriptions add fuel to the belief that the artifact carries a curse. There are unconfirmed reports that museum staff do not dismiss lightly. Some workers claim cameras glitch whenever they point at the lid. A visitor once touched the glass case and fainted seconds later. A few guests say photos taken near the display show blurred human shapes standing behind them even when no one else was present. None of these claims have been proven, yet they continue to circulate inside the museum. The unlucky mummy cannot be displayed without caution because the reaction from the public is unpredictable. People who approach it often experience anxiety, discomfort, or a sudden urge to step away. The museum has also seen an increase in superstitious behavior whenever the artifact is highlighted. Although it poses no physical danger, it creates enough emotional and psychological disturbance to make staff treat it with unusual care. The lid remains behind glass, and visitors approach it knowing its reputation long before they see it.